The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing orange against the pale morning sky. General Marcus Chen pressed his face against the small window, watching the blue marble grow larger below him. After 18 months commanding the defense of Kepler Station against the Zephyrian invasion, returning to Earth felt strange and unfamiliar. The war had been brutal. 3 solar systems had fallen before humanity finally pushed back the alien forces. Millions of soldiers had died in the fighting, their names now etched in stone monuments across human space. Marcus carried the weight of every decision he had made, every life lost under his command. The shuttle touched down at Andrews Spaceport with barely a whisper. Marcus gathered his few belongings and stepped onto the landing pad. The familiar smell of Earth's air filled his lungs, a mixture of growing things and distant rain that no space station could replicate. Home. Yet it felt like visiting a place from a half-remembered dream. A young lieutenant waited beside a military transport. She snapped to attention as Marcus approached, her uniform crisp and perfect. "General Chen, sir. Welcome home." Marcus returned her salute. "Thank you, Lieutenant. What's our destination?" "Arlington National Cemetery, sir." "The ceremony begins in 2 hours, Arlington." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Today they would dedicate the new memorial wall, inscribed with the names of the fallen from the Kepler campaign. His fallen, the soldiers who had followed his orders into battle and never returned home. The transport glided silently through the Virginia countryside. Marcus watched the landscape roll past. Green fields, ancient trees, small towns that looked exactly as they had when he left. It seemed impossible that life had continued here, while entire worlds burned in distant space. They entered the cemetery gates, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of reverence settle over him. Row upon row of white headstones stretched across rolling hills, each marking a life given in service. The memorial wall stood at the cemetery's heart, a massive structure of black granite that seemed to absorb the morning light. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the crowd gathering. Military personnel in dress uniforms, families carrying flowers, dignitaries from across the solar system. News crews set up their equipment, preparing to broadcast the ceremony across human space. This dedication would be seen by billions. The transport stopped near the memorial and Marcus stepped out. The weight of his dress uniform felt strange after months in combat gear. Ribbons and medals covered his chest, each representing battles fought and won. Yet standing here, surrounded by the names of the dead, they felt meaningless. "General Chen?" A voice called his name. Marcus turned to see Admiral Rodriguez approaching. She had aged since he last saw her. New lines around her eyes speaking of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. They had served together for 20 years, rising through the ranks side by side. "Elena," Marcus said, embracing his old friend. "Thank you for arranging this." "The families deserve this memorial," she replied. "Their loved ones died heroes. The galaxy knows it because of what they did at Kepler." Marcus nodded, but the words felt hollow. Heroes. The families needed to believe their children, their parents, their siblings had died for something meaningful. Marcus wanted to believe it too. More officers approached, offering condolences and congratulations. Marcus accepted their words with practiced grace, playing the part of the victorious general. Inside he felt empty. Victory had come at such a terrible cost. The ceremony area filled with people. Marcus recognized some faces, families he had written letters to, parents he had called with the worst possible news. They nodded at him with expressions mixing grief and gratitude. He had brought their loved ones home, even if only in memory. A podium stood before the memorial wall, microphones arranged for the speeches to come. Marcus would speak first, followed by the Secretary of Defense and several other officials. The words were already prepared, written by speechwriters who had never seen combat. They spoke of sacrifice and duty, of freedom preserved and humanity protected. As the crowd settled into place, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. Near the memorial wall, a single figure stood at attention. The man wore an immaculate dress uniform, white gloves, and polished boots that reflected the morning sun. A ceremonial rifle rested at his side, the Tomb Guard. Marcus had heard of them but never seen one up close. These soldiers maintained a constant vigil at the memorial, standing watch over the honored dead 24 hours a day, regardless of weather or circumstance. They moved with precision that bordered on the supernatural, their devotion absolute. This guard appeared young, perhaps 25, with the bearing of someone far older. His face showed no emotion, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd. He had been standing there when Marcus arrived and would remain long after everyone left. The sight stirred something in Marcus's chest. Here was a soldier who understood duty in its purest form. No glory, no recognition, just service. The guard's vigil honored not just the dead, but the living families who needed to know their loved ones were remembered. Admiral Rodriguez touched Marcus's arm. "It's time." Marcus straightened his uniform and walked toward the podium. The crowd fell silent as he approached the microphones. Hundreds of faces looked up at him, waiting for words that could somehow make sense of such tremendous loss. Behind the podium, the memorial wall rose like a black mirror, reflecting the sky and clouds above. Thousands of names covered its surface, laser etched into the granite with surgical precision. Marcus could see his own reflection in the polished stone, his image superimposed over the names of the dead. He began to speak, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Marcus's voice echoed across the memorial grounds as he delivered his prepared remarks. He spoke of courage under fire, of soldiers who faced impossible odds without flinching. The words felt like stones in his mouth, heavy and cold. How could he capture the reality of war in a few polite sentences? He remembered Private Jessica Torres, 19 years old, who had held a breach in the station's hull while her squad evacuated wounded. The vacuum had torn her away before the emergency seals could activate. Or Lieutenant Commander Williams, who had manually guided his damaged fighter into a Zephyrian dreadnought's reactor core. 37 years old, 3 children back on Mars. The crowd listened with respectful attention. Some wiped tears from their eyes as Marcus recounted acts of heroism. Parents clutched photos of their lost children. Spouses held folded flags that had once draped coffins. The weight of their grief pressed against him like a physical force. As he spoke, Marcus found his gaze drifting to the tomb guard. The young soldier remained perfectly still, his vigil unbroken despite the ceremony happening around him. His dedication was absolute, unwavering. While politicians made speeches and reporters took pictures, this guard simply served. Marcus finished his remarks to polite applause and stepped away from the podium. Admiral Rodriguez took his place, followed by the Secretary of Defense. Marcus listened with half his attention, his mind wandering to darker memories. The final assault on the Zephyrian flagship had been a massacre. Marcus had ordered 3 full battalions to board the enemy vessel, knowing most would never return. The alien ship's defenses had been devastating. Plasma cannons that could vaporize a human instantly, gravity traps that crushed entire squads. But the mission had succeeded. The Zephyrian command structure collapsed, and their remaining forces retreated beyond human space. Victory. The newspapers called it humanity's greatest triumph. Marcus called it the worst day of his career. The ceremony continued with military honors, a rifle salute that echoed across the cemetery like distant thunder. A bugler played taps, the mournful notes hanging in the still air. Marcus stood at attention, his eyes fixed on the memorial wall where so many names gleamed in the sunlight. When the formal proceedings ended, the crowd began to disperse. Families approached the wall to find specific names, running their fingers over the etched letters. Marcus watched them search, some finding their loved ones quickly, others needing time to locate the right spot among thousands of entries. An elderly woman caught his attention. She moved slowly along the wall, her eyes scanning the names with desperate intensity. Her hands shook as she traced the letters, and Marcus realized she was searching for someone specific. A grandson, perhaps, or a son who had never made it home. Marcus approached her carefully. "Ma'am, can I help you find someone?" She looked up with tears streaming down her weathered face. "My boy, Tommy Castellanos, Marine Corporal. He was on your ship." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Corporal Castellanos. He remembered approving the young man's transfer to the assault team. 22 years old, eager to prove himself. He had died in the first wave of the boarding action. "Section 7, Row 12, Marcus said softly. "I'll show you." He guided the woman to her grandson's name, carved into the black granite alongside dozens of others. She pressed her palm against the stone and sobbed. Marcus stood beside her in silence, offering what comfort his presence could provide. "He wanted to be a teacher," she whispered. "After his service, he loved children. Marcus nodded, remembering the young Marine's file. Castellanos had indeed planned to use his military benefits for education, hoping to teach elementary school. Those dreams now lived only in memory. Other families found their way to Marcus throughout the afternoon. They shared stories, showed pictures, spoke of the futures that would never be. Each conversation carved another piece from his heart. These weren't just names on a wall. They were real people with hopes and families and plans that had been cut short by his decisions. As the sun began to set, the crowds thinned. Maintenance crews started cleaning up after the ceremony, collecting programs and folding chairs. The memorial wall stood empty except for a few remaining family members and the eternal presence of the tomb guard. Marcus found himself drawn to the guard's position. The young soldier had not moved in the 6 hours since the ceremony began. His uniform remained perfect, his posture unwavering. Such dedication seemed almost superhuman. "Excuse me?" Marcus said, approaching carefully. He didn't want to disturb the man's vigil. The guard's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, but he spoke in a clear, professional tone. "Good evening, General. I am Sergeant First Class David Park." "Sergeant Park," Marcus replied. "I wanted to thank you for your service here. Your vigil honors the fallen." "It is my privilege, sir." Marcus studied the young man's profile. Park couldn't be much older than many of the soldiers whose names covered the wall behind them. Yet he carried himself with the dignity of a veteran twice his age. "How long have you been standing guard?" Marcus asked. "This shift began at 0600, sir. I will be relieved at midnight. 18 hours. Marcus had known the guards maintained long shifts, but experiencing it firsthand was different. To stand motionless for 18 hours required discipline beyond ordinary training. "Have you ever served in combat, Sergeant?" "No, sir. I have served here at the memorial for 3 years. 3 years, Marcus repeated. That's extraordinary dedication. The fallen deserve nothing less, sir. Something in the guard's tone made Marcus look more closely at him. Despite his youth, Park's eyes held depths that spoke of understanding beyond his years. This was not simply a soldier following orders. This was someone who had found meaning in service to the dead. "Do you know about the Kepler campaign?" Marcus asked. "Yes, sir. The names from that action were added to the wall last month." Marcus felt the weight of those names pressing against him, his decisions, his responsibility. "I commanded that operation, Sergeant. Every name from Kepler is there because of orders I gave." For the first time, Park's eyes shifted slightly, glancing at Marcus before returning to their forward position. "Yes, sir. I know who you are." The simple acknowledgement hung between them. Marcus waited for judgment, for blame, for some recognition of the terrible cost his victory had demanded. Instead, Park simply continued his vigil. The evening's shadows lengthened across the memorial grounds as Marcus remained near Sergeant Park. Other visitors had departed, leaving only a few maintenance workers and security personnel. The memorial wall reflected the fading light like a mirror of polished obsidian, the names of the fallen glowing softly in the sunset. Marcus found himself studying the guard's discipline with growing fascination. Park stood with mechanical precision, his breathing so controlled it was barely visible. His white gloves gripped his ceremonial rifle with exact positioning, never shifting even slightly. This level of dedication went far beyond normal military bearing. "Sergeant," Marcus said quietly, "may I ask what motivated you to become a tomb guard?" Park remained silent for several seconds, and Marcus wondered if the question was inappropriate. Then the guard spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "My brother, sir, Staff Sergeant Michael Park, killed in action during the Titan defense." Marcus remembered the Titan defense. 2 years before Kepler, the Zephyrian fleet had attacked Saturn's industrial colonies. The battle had been fierce but brief. Humanity's defenders had held the line, but at tremendous cost. Thousands of soldiers had died protecting the orbital factories that supplied the war effort. "I'm sorry for your loss," Marcus said. "Michael was everything I wanted to be," Park continued, his eyes never wavering from their forward position. "Brave, dedicated, selfless. When he died, I wanted to honor him somehow. The tomb guard seemed like the right way." 3 years, Marcus said. "That's a long time to maintain this vigil. Every day matters, sir. Every hour. The families come here looking for connection to their loved ones. They need to know someone remembers. Someone cares enough to stand watch." Marcus nodded, understanding dawning. The tomb guard wasn't just ceremonial. It was a living symbol of remembrance. a promise that the sacrifice of the fallen would never be forgotten. Park and his fellow guards were the human embodiment of that promise. "Do you ever doubt it's worth it?" Marcus asked. "Standing here while others go about their lives?" "No, sir. This is where I belong." The certainty in Park's voice impressed Marcus. Here was a young man who had found his purpose and embraced it completely. No ambition for promotion or recognition, no desire for easier assignments, just service in its purest form. Marcus thought about his own motivations. He had joined the military seeking advancement, prestige, the chance to make a difference on a grand scale. Command had brought him everything he thought he wanted: respect, responsibility, the power to shape events. Yet, standing here among the names of the dead, those achievements felt hollow. "Sergeant, do you know what it's like to order men to their deaths?" Park's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No, sir. But I know what it's like to honor men who accepted those orders." The distinction struck Marcus like a physical blow. He had focused so much on his own burden of command that he had lost sight of the greater truth. These soldiers hadn't died because of his orders. They had died because they chose to follow them. They had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, knowing the risks. The assault on the Zephyrian flagship, Marcus continued, compelled to speak despite the pain it caused. "I sent 3 battalions knowing most wouldn't return. The tactical analysis showed 70% casualties minimum. I signed their death warrants. You gave them the chance to save humanity, sir." The simple statement hit Marcus harder than any accusation could have. Park wasn't offering absolution or empty comfort. He was stating a fact. The soldiers under Marcus's command had understood the stakes. Earth itself had been threatened. The entire human species faced potential extinction. In that context, the choice to sacrifice their lives took on different meaning. "Still," Marcus said, "those families today, they lost everything because of my decisions. They lost everything because evil existed and good people chose to fight it." Marcus stared at the young guard with new appreciation. Despite his youth, Park possessed wisdom that came from deep contemplation. 3 years of standing vigil had given him time to think about sacrifice, duty, and the nature of service. His insights cut through Marcus's guilt to reach fundamental truths. The memorial grounds had grown quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of wind through the trees. Security lights began to illuminate the pathways, casting long shadows across the grass. Soon Park would be relieved by another guard, but the vigil would continue unbroken. "Sergeant, do you ever talk to them?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the memorial wall. "Sometimes, sir, when the crowds are gone and it's quiet. I tell them about the visitors who came to see them, the families who still remember, the children who were born after they died but carry their names." Marcus felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. The idea of this young soldier conducting one-sided conversations with the dead, keeping them connected to the living world they had died to protect, was almost unbearably moving. "What do you think they would say to me?" Marcus asked. "If they could speak?" Park considered the question for a long moment. "I think they would want you to remember why they served, sir. Not how they died, but why they chose to fight." The guard's words resonated in Marcus's chest like struck bells. For 18 months he had carried the weight of their deaths without considering the meaning behind their sacrifice. They hadn't died because he was a poor commander. They had died because they believed in something worth dying for. A younger guard approached from the direction of the security station, walking with the same precise bearing as Park. The changing of the guard would happen soon, a ceremony that occurred every few hours around the clock. Marcus realized he was witnessing something sacred, the passing of responsibility from one sentinel to another. "Sergeant Park," Marcus said, "I want you to know that meeting you has meant more than I can express. Your service here, your dedication to honoring the fallen, it's shown me something I had lost sight of." "Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to speak with you." The approaching guard drew closer, his footsteps precisely timed and measured. Marcus prepared to step back and allow the ceremony to proceed. These men needed to maintain their sacred routine without interference from outsiders, even 4-star generals. But as he watched Park prepare for the formal transfer of his post, Marcus felt compelled to ask one more question, something that had been building in his mind throughout their conversation. "Sergeant," he said, "if you could say one thing to help me understand how to carry this burden, what would it be?" Park's eyes remained fixed ahead, but Marcus saw something shift in his expression. A moment of deep consideration, as if the guard was reaching for words that could capture years of contemplation and service. The young soldier who had spent 3 years honoring the dead was about to share the most important lesson he had learned. Before Park could answer Marcus's question, the approaching guard reached their position. Marcus stepped back to observe the changing of the guard ceremony. He had heard about this ritual but never witnessed it firsthand. The relief guard moved with mechanical precision, each step exactly 21 inches long. He approached Park's position with ceremonial slowness, his polished boots clicking against the stone pathway. Both soldiers wore identical expressions of solemn concentration. The ceremony unfolded in complete silence. No words were spoken as the guards performed their intricate dance of position changes. The new guard inspected Park's rifle, his uniform, his bearing. Every detail had to be perfect before the transfer could be completed. This wasn't just military procedure. It was a sacred ritual honoring the dead. Marcus watched with growing respect. These soldiers understood something that generals and politicians often missed. Honor wasn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It was about consistency, dedication, and the willingness to serve without expectation of reward. When the ceremony concluded, Park stepped away from his post for the first time in 18 hours. His relief immediately assumed the same rigid posture, beginning his own vigil. The guard would be maintained without interruption as it had been for decades. Park moved stiffly, his muscles protesting after hours of motionless standing. Marcus fell into step beside him as they walked toward the security station where the off-duty guards prepared for rest. "That was remarkable," Marcus said. "The precision, the dedication. How do you maintain that level of discipline for so many hours?" "Practice, sir, and understanding what it represents. Every moment of imperfection dishonors the fallen." They walked in comfortable silence through the memorial grounds. The names on the wall seemed to glow in the security lighting, visible reminders of lives cut short. Marcus found himself reading individual entries as they passed: ages, ranks, units, dates of death. So many young faces frozen forever in time. "Sergeant," Marcus said as they reached the security building, "you started to answer my question about carrying this burden. I'd like to hear your thoughts." Park paused at the entrance, considering. "Sir, may I ask you something first?" "Of course. Why did you come here today, really?" "Not for the ceremony. You could have sent a representative. Why did you need to be here personally?" Marcus felt the question strike deep. Why had he insisted on attending when every instinct told him to avoid this place of painful memories? "I needed to see their names," he said finally, "to face what my decisions cost. And now that you've seen them, I feel responsible, guilty. These people trusted me with their lives and I failed them." Park nodded slowly. "Sir, with respect, I think you're asking the wrong question." "What do you mean?" "You're asking how to carry the burden of their deaths. But that's not your burden to carry." Marcus stared at the young sergeant, confused. "I commanded the operation. I gave the orders that sent them to die. If that's not my burden, then whose is it?" Park looked back toward the memorial wall, his expression thoughtful. "Sir, do you know how many visitors we get here each week?" "No, thousands. Families, veterans, school groups, tourists from across the galaxy. They come to remember, to pay respects, to understand sacrifice. And you know what I've learned watching them?" Marcus waited, sensing something important was coming. "The dead don't need us to carry their burden," Park continued. "They carried it themselves when they chose to serve. What they need from us is something different. What's that? They need us to carry their purpose forward." The words hit Marcus like a revelation. For 18 months, he had been carrying guilt and responsibility for deaths that weren't his to own. These soldiers had made their own choices, accepted their own risks. His burden wasn't their deaths. It was ensuring their sacrifice meant something. "Tell me about the Kepler Station battle," Park said. "Not the casualties. Not your decisions. Tell me what was at stake." Marcus felt his throat tighten. The Zephyrians had broken through our outer defenses. 3 colonies had already fallen. If Kepler Station had been destroyed, they would have had a clear path to Earth. How many people live on Earth, sir? 12 billion. And the colonies under threat? Another 8 billion, Park nodded. 20 billion lives. 20 billion people who got to wake up the next morning because of what happened at Kepler Station. Marcus had known these numbers, but he had never framed them this way. His focus had been so fixed on the 3,000 soldiers who died that he had lost sight of the 20 billion who lived. The assault on the Zephyrian flagship, Park continued. How long did military analysts estimate the war would continue without that victory? Conservative estimates said 2 more years, possibly 5. How many more would have died in those years? Marcus felt the mathematical reality settling over him like a weight lifting rather than settling. Millions. Tens of millions. So when you gave those orders, when you sent those 3 battalions into impossible odds, you weren't just commanding soldiers. You were saving civilizations. The insight struck Marcus with overwhelming force. He had been carrying the burden of command as if it were purely destructive, focusing only on the lives lost while ignoring the lives saved. The soldiers who died at Kepler Station hadn't died in vain. They had died to preserve everything humanity held dear. But the families, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. How do I face them knowing I could have chosen differently? Could you have, sir, really? With 20 billion lives at stake, was there another choice that would have resulted in fewer deaths overall? Marcus thought back to the tactical situation. The Zephyrian flagship had been the key to their entire invasion force. Every wargaming scenario had concluded that a direct assault was the only option with any chance of success. Any delay would have allowed enemy reinforcements to arrive, making victory impossible. No, he admitted, there wasn't another choice. Then you didn't fail those soldiers, sir. You honored them by giving them the chance to save everyone they loved. Marcus felt tears building in his eyes. For the first time since the battle, he was seeing his decisions through a different lens. The weight of command wasn't just about the lives lost. It was about the lives preserved. His soldiers had understood this even if he had forgotten. Those families today, Marcus said, they seem to forgive me. I couldn't understand why. Because they know what you're just remembering, sir. Their loved ones died heroes, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to be. The conversation was interrupted by another guard emerging from the security building. He approached Park with the same measured precision Marcus had observed throughout the day. Sergeant Park, the newcomer said, the duty officer needs to see you for tomorrow's schedule. Park nodded and turned back to Marcus. Sir, I need to report for debriefing, but thank you for this conversation. It's been an honor. Marcus shook the young man's hand, feeling a profound shift in his understanding. Thank you, Sergeant. You've given me more than you know. As Park walked away, Marcus remained outside the security building, looking back at the memorial wall glowing in the distance. The names were still there, the loss still real. But their meaning had changed. They weren't monuments to his failure. They were testaments to humanity's finest hour. Marcus stood alone outside the security building, his mind processing everything Sergeant Park had told him. The memorial wall dominated the horizon, its black surface reflecting the stars that had begun to appear in the darkening sky. For the first time in 18 months, Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not the crushing weight of guilt, but something lighter. Understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of peace. He decided to walk back to the memorial before his transport arrived. The grounds were nearly empty now, just a few security personnel and the lone guard maintaining his vigil. Marcus's footsteps echoed softly on the stone pathways as he approached the wall. The new guard stood in perfect position, his bearing identical to Park's. These soldiers were interchangeable in their dedication, each one carrying the same sacred commitment to honor the dead. Marcus wondered how many guards had stood this post over the years. How many young men and women had devoted their lives to this eternal vigil. He began reading names again, but this time with different eyes. Instead of focusing on the loss each name represented, he tried to imagine the life behind it. Corporal Castellanos, who had wanted to teach children. Lieutenant Commander Williams, who had left 3 children of his own. Staff Sergeant Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who had died holding a corridor so medics could evacuate wounded. Each name told a story of choice. These soldiers had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. They had raised their hands when the call came for volunteers. They had looked death in the face and chosen duty over safety. They weren't victims, Marcus whispered to himself. They were heroes. The realization felt like a physical weight lifting from his shoulders. For 18 months he had carried these soldiers as his failures. But they weren't his failures. They were his finest achievement. Under his command, ordinary people had become extraordinary. They had risen to meet the ultimate test and proven that humanity was worth defending. Marcus found himself speaking to the wall, following Park's example. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand," he said softly. "You trusted me to give your lives meaning, and I almost failed you by focusing on your deaths instead of your sacrifice." The wall reflected his image back at him, his face superimposed over the thousands of names. For a moment it seemed like he was part of the memorial himself, not as one of the fallen but as someone who belonged to their story. Behind him, footsteps approached on the pathway. Marcus turned to see Sergeant Park walking toward him, moving with the same measured precision he had shown during his long vigil. He must have finished his debriefing quickly. "General," Park said as he drew closer, "I hope you don't mind the interruption." "Not at all, Sergeant. I was just talking to them." Park nodded approvingly. "They listened, sir. I'm certain of it." "Have you ever wondered what they would say back?" "Every day," Park replied. "But I think I know what it would be." "What's that?" Park stepped closer to the wall, his eyes scanning the names carved into the black granite. "They would tell us to stop mourning and start celebrating. They would want us to remember that they won, that humanity survived because of what they did." Marcus felt the truth of those words resonating in his chest. These soldiers hadn't died in defeat. They had died in victory. The war was over, the enemy defeated, humanity safe. Their sacrifice had accomplished exactly what they intended. "I've been carrying their deaths like a burden," Marcus said, "instead of carrying their victory like a banner." "Yes, sir. And that dishonors them more than any military failure could." The insight struck Marcus with stunning clarity. By wallowing in guilt, by focusing on loss instead of achievement, he had been diminishing their sacrifice. These soldiers deserve to be remembered as winners, not casualties. "Sergeant," Marcus said, "when you stand watch here, what do you think about during those long hours?" Park considered the question carefully. "I think about the families who visit, the children who will grow up free because of what these soldiers did, the colonies that are rebuilding, the cities that weren't destroyed, the people who are alive today because someone chose to stand guard." "And that sustains you? Through 18-hour shifts in all weather?" "It does more than sustain me, sir. It honors me. I get to be part of their story." Marcus understood. Park wasn't just guarding a memorial. He was participating in an ongoing victory. Every day he stood watch was another day that humanity remained free. Every visitor who came to pay respects was proof that the sacrifice had meaning. "The war changed all of us," Marcus said, "but I think I forgot what we were fighting for." "What were you fighting for, sir?" The question seemed simple, but Marcus found himself really considering it for the first time since the battle ended. What had driven him to make those impossible decisions? What had given him the strength to send soldiers into certain death? "Hope," he said finally. "The hope that children would grow up in a universe where humanity mattered, where our values, our dreams, our potential could flourish." And did they? Marcus looked around the memorial grounds, thinking about the ceremony earlier that day. Families had come to honor their dead, yes, but they had also come to celebrate victory. Children had run across the grass while their parents read names. Young couples had walked hand in hand among the monuments. Life continued vibrant and free. "Yes," he said. "They did." Park nodded and moved closer to the wall. He reached out and touched one of the names, Staff Sergeant Michael Park, his brother who had died defending Titan. Michael wanted to be a doctor after his service. He used to say he wanted to heal people the way soldiers protect them. "I'm sure he would be proud of what you've become." "I hope so, sir. But more than that, I hope he knows his death meant something. That the medical research stations around Titan are operating because he kept them safe. That the medicines being developed there will save lives across the galaxy." Marcus felt something profound settling into place in his understanding. This wasn't about guilt or forgiveness. It wasn't about carrying burdens or seeking absolution. It was about honoring victory and ensuring that sacrifice retained its meaning. "Sergeant," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to ask you something important, something I should have asked 18 months ago." Park turned to face him, his expression serious and attentive. "Those soldiers who died under my command," Marcus continued, "they made the ultimate sacrifice for humanity. They gave everything so others could live free. As their commanding officer, what's my responsibility to them now?" Park looked at Marcus for a long moment, then back at the memorial wall where thousands of names caught the starlight. His answer, when it came, was delivered with the same quiet certainty he had shown throughout their conversation. "Sir," Park said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years spent honoring the dead, Your responsibility is to live a life worthy of their sacrifice. The words hit Marcus like lightning. Simple, profound, undeniably true. Not to carry guilt or seek forgiveness, not to punish himself or diminish their achievement. His responsibility was to live in a way that justified what they had given up. Tears began flowing down Marcus's cheeks as the full impact of Park's words settled into his heart. For 18 months, he had been failing his soldiers by wasting the life they had died to preserve. They hadn't sacrificed themselves so he could live in guilt and regret. They had died so he could live in victory and hope. Marcus Chen stood before the memorial wall with tears streaming down his face, Park's words echoing in his mind like a bell that would never stop ringing. Live a life worthy of their sacrifice, so simple, so devastating in its clarity. For 18 months he had been living as if he were the one who had died at Kepler Station. He had withdrawn from life, from joy, from hope. He had carried guilt like a shroud, believing that suffering somehow honored the dead. But Park's single sentence had shattered that delusion completely. The soldiers whose names covered this wall hadn't died so Marcus could live in misery. They had died so he could live in freedom. They had given their futures so others could have theirs. To waste that gift through guilt and self-punishment wasn't honor. It was betrayal. My God, Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. What have I been doing? Park stood quietly beside him, offering silent support as the general processed the magnitude of his realization. The young sergeant had delivered his truth without judgment or expectation. He had simply shared the wisdom earned through 3 years of standing watch over the honored dead. Marcus thought about the past 18 months. He had isolated himself from friends and family. He had declined promotions and speaking engagements. He had turned down Admiral Rodriguez's invitation to head the new Academy of Strategic Command. He had treated his survival as something shameful rather than something precious. They trusted me with their lives, Marcus said through his tears, and I've been wasting the life they saved. Not wasting, sir, Park replied gently. Learning, growing, becoming worthy of their trust. Marcus looked at the young sergeant with amazement. How had someone so young acquired such profound wisdom? 3 years of contemplating sacrifice and service had given Park insights that Marcus, with all his education and experience, had missed completely. I need to change, Marcus said. Everything. The way I've been living, thinking, existing. They deserve better from me. They deserve the best from you, sir. Your best work, your best leadership, your best life. Marcus nodded, feeling purpose returning to his heart for the first time since the battle. These soldiers hadn't died to end his career. They had died to give it meaning. They hadn't sacrificed themselves to burden him with guilt. They had given him the responsibility to use their gift wisely. The academy position, Marcus said suddenly. Admiral Rodriguez offered me the chance to train the next generation of commanders. I turned it down because I thought I didn't deserve it. Do you think your soldiers would want the next generation trained by someone else? Park asked. The question struck Marcus like a physical blow. Of course they wouldn't. They had followed him into impossible odds because they trusted his leadership. They had died believing in his ability to make the hard choices. To refuse to pass that knowledge to future officers wasn't humility. It was cowardice. I need to call Elena, Marcus said, reaching for his communication device. Then he stopped. No, this conversation needs to happen in person, with proper respect for what it means. Park nodded approvingly. The academy is important work, sir. Those cadets will face challenges we can't imagine. They'll need the wisdom you earned at Kepler Station. Marcus felt a shift in his perspective so fundamental, it was almost disorienting. For months he had seen Kepler Station as his greatest failure. Now he understood it was his most important education. He had learned things about leadership, sacrifice, and command that couldn't be taught in classrooms. That knowledge was too valuable to waste on self-pity. There's something else, Marcus said. Something I should have done months ago. What's that, sir? I need to visit the families. Not to apologize, but to thank them. To let them know their loved one's sacrifice has meaning beyond what they can imagine. Park's expression showed deep approval. They need to hear that, sir. From you specifically. You were there. You witnessed their courage. You can tell their stories in ways no one else can. Marcus thought about Mrs. Castellanos searching for her grandson's name with trembling hands. What if instead of seeing her grief, he had shared her grandson's bravery? What if he had told her about Corporal Castellanos volunteering for the most dangerous positions? What if he had described the young Marine's determination to protect his fellow soldiers? "I've been so focused on how they died," Marcus said, "that I forgot to honor how they lived. Their lives were remarkable, sir. Brief, but remarkable." Marcus wiped his tears and looked back at the memorial wall with new eyes. These weren't monuments to tragedy. They were celebrations of heroism. Each name represented someone who had chosen service over safety, duty over comfort, humanity's future over their own. "Sergeant Park," Marcus said, "you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that, sir?" "The right to be proud of my soldiers. The right to honor their victory instead of mourning their loss." "You always had that right, sir. You just needed to remember it." The two men stood in comfortable silence, both gazing at the wall where starlight illuminated thousands of names. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since before the battle, a sense of connection to something larger than himself. These soldiers were part of his story, but he was also part of theirs. Their sacrifice gave his life purpose. His life gave their sacrifice meaning. "I should go," Marcus said finally. "I have a lot of work to do. Calls to make, decisions to reverse, a life to rebuild." "Yes, sir." "And General?" "Yes?" "When you do rebuild your life, remember that they're watching. Every achievement, every act of leadership, every moment of joy, they're part of it all." Marcus felt fresh tears threatening, but these were different from the ones that had come before. These weren't tears of grief or guilt. They were tears of gratitude and determination. "Thank you, Sergeant, for everything. For standing watch, for sharing your wisdom, for helping me remember who I'm supposed to be. It's been an honor." "Sir," Marcus shook Park's hand one final time, then began walking toward the memorial entrance where his transport waited. With each step, he felt the weight of 18 months of misplaced guilt lifting from his shoulders. In its place came something far more powerful: purpose. His soldiers hadn't died to end his story. They had died to begin it. Behind him, Sergeant Park resumed his position near the memorial wall, ready to continue his eternal vigil. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new families seeking connection to their lost loved ones. Park would be there to stand watch, to offer silent comfort, to ensure that the sacrifice of the fallen retained its sacred meaning. The guard understood something, that Marcus was just learning, that honoring the dead meant celebrating the life their sacrifice had preserved. It meant living with purpose, leading with wisdom, and never forgetting that freedom came at a price that others had paid. 6 months later, Admiral Marcus Chen stood before 300 cadets at the newly established Academy of Strategic Command. The morning sun streamed through the lecture hall's tall windows, illuminating eager young faces from across human space. These men and women represented the future of military leadership, and Marcus felt the profound responsibility of preparing them for challenges yet to come. His promotion to admiral had come with the academy appointment, along with a mandate to develop new doctrines based on lessons learned from the Zephyrian War. But Marcus knew his most important teaching wouldn't come from tactical manuals or strategic theories. It would come from understanding what Sergeant Park had taught him that evening at Arlington Cemetery. "Today we're going to discuss command responsibility," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. Not the textbook definition, but the reality of what it means to lead others into harm's way. The cadets leaned forward attentively. These young officers had studied the Kepler Station battle extensively. To them, Marcus was a legendary figure, the general who had saved humanity through brilliant tactical decisions. They didn't know about the 18 months of guilt that had followed, or the profound transformation that had come from a tomb guard's simple wisdom. "Who can tell me the primary responsibility of a commanding officer?" Marcus asked. Hands shot up across the room. Marcus selected a young woman in the front row, Cadet Lieutenant Torres. He had noticed her name immediately when reviewing the class roster. She was the younger sister of Private Jessica Torres, who had died holding the hull breach at Kepler Station. "Sir, the primary responsibility is mission accomplishment while maintaining unit integrity," Torres replied with crisp precision. "Textbook correct," Marcus acknowledged, "but incomplete. Anyone want to expand on that?" Another hand. "Sir, we're also responsible for the welfare and development of our subordinates," offered Cadet Captain Kim, getting warmer. "But still missing something crucial." The cadets exchanged glances, uncertain what their instructor was seeking. Marcus had found that the most important lessons couldn't be simply told. They had to be discovered through careful guidance. "Let me ask you this," Marcus continued. "What happens after the mission is complete? After the battle is won or lost? What's your responsibility then?" A cadet near the back raised his hand tentatively. "After-action reports, sir? Casualty assessments? Those are administrative duties. I'm talking about something deeper, something that will define your entire career and the rest of your life." Marcus walked to the front of the classroom and activated the holographic display. Images appeared showing the memorial wall at Arlington Cemetery. Thousands of names etched in black granite. Several cadets straightened as they recognized the memorial where many of their own family members were honored. "This is why we're really here," Marcus said. "Every name on this wall represents someone who trusted their commanding officer with the most precious thing they possessed, their life. Some of you will face similar trust. The question is, how will you carry that responsibility?" The room remained silent as cadets contemplated the implications. Marcus could see understanding beginning to dawn on some faces, confusion on others. "I want to tell you about a conversation I had with a tomb guard 6 months ago," Marcus continued. "A young sergeant who taught me something that 25 years of military service hadn't. He described his meeting with Sergeant Park, the long conversation about duty and sacrifice, and the moment when a simple sentence had transformed his understanding of command responsibility. As he spoke, Marcus watched the cadets' expressions change from professional interest to deep personal engagement. "Your responsibility is to live a life worthy of their sacrifice," Marcus repeated Park's words. 7 words that changed everything for me. Cadet Torres raised her hand. "Sir, what did that mean to you specifically?" Marcus smiled at the question. Torres deserved to know how her sister's sacrifice had affected the general who ordered it. "It meant that if soldiers die under my command, I dishonor them by wasting the life they died to preserve. Every day I live in guilt or self-pity is a day I steal from their victory." "But sir," another cadet interjected, "how do you handle the weight of those decisions, sending people to die?" "You remember why they served," Marcus replied. "Not how they died, but why they chose to fight. The soldiers at Kepler Station didn't die because I failed them. They died because they succeeded in saving everything they loved." Marcus activated another section of the display, showing images of the rebuilt colonies, the thriving cities, the children born since the war ended. This is what they died for. This is what makes their sacrifice meaningful. He spent the next hour walking the cadets through specific scenarios, helping them understand the difference between necessary sacrifice and wasted life. He taught them to honor victory rather than dwelling on loss, to carry purpose rather than guilt. "Some of you will face impossible choices," Marcus said as the session neared its end. "You'll have to send good people into danger, knowing some won't return. When that day comes, remember that your soldiers trust you not just with their lives, but with the meaning of their sacrifice." After dismissing the class, Marcus remained in the lecture hall as cadets filed out. Several approached with additional questions, particularly Torres, who wanted to know more about her sister's actions during the battle. Marcus shared what he remembered: Jessica's courage, her determination, her final transmission saying that the hull breach was sealed and her squad was safe. "She saved 12 people," Marcus told Torres. "Those 12 went on to save others. Your sister's sacrifice rippled outward in ways she could never have imagined." Torres nodded, tears in her eyes but standing tall with pride. "Thank you, sir, for helping me understand." As the last cadet departed, Marcus gathered his materials and prepared for his next appointment. Admiral Rodriguez had scheduled a meeting to discuss expanding the academy program to other worlds. The demand for properly trained officers was growing as humanity established new colonies in former Zephyrian territory. Walking across the academy grounds, Marcus reflected on the changes in his life since that evening at Arlington Cemetery. He had thrown himself into his work with renewed purpose, but also into life itself. He had reconnected with old friends, started dating again, even taken up painting, something he had always wanted to try but never found time for. Every experience was enhanced by the knowledge that he was living it on behalf of those who couldn't. When he watched a sunset, he remembered that soldiers had died to preserve such beauty. When he laughed with friends, he honored those who would never share such moments. His life had become a living memorial to their sacrifice. His communication device chimed with an incoming message. It was from Sergeant Park, now promoted to staff sergeant and serving as head of the honor guard detail at Arlington. They had maintained regular contact since their meeting, and Marcus had come to value the young soldier's insights deeply. "Admiral," the message read, "saw your interview on the military news network. The families appreciate you sharing their stories. You're giving meaning to their sacrifice in ways they never imagined possible." "Well done, sir." Marcus smiled as he read the message. He had begun doing interviews and writing articles about the individual soldiers from Kepler Station, sharing their stories with the broader public. Not their deaths, but their lives. Their dreams, their courage, their choice to serve something greater than themselves. Each story he told was another way of living worthily of their sacrifice. Each cadet he trained carried forward their legacy. Each day he embraced with purpose and joy was a victory they had made possible. Marcus reached his office and paused at the window overlooking the academy parade ground. Young officers practiced drill formations while others attended classes on tactics and leadership. These men and women would face the unknown challenges of humanity's expanding frontier. Some would make the ultimate sacrifice in service to others. When that day came, Marcus hoped their commanders would remember the lesson he had learned from a tomb guard's wisdom. The responsibility of command wasn't to carry the burden of the dead. It was to live a life worthy of their sacrifice. Outside, the flag of the United Human Colonies flew in the afternoon breeze, its stars representing worlds that remained free because soldiers had chosen duty over safety. The banner itself was a symbol of victory, paid for in blood but flying proudly in the wind. Marcus Chen, Admiral of the Fleet and Commandant of the Strategic Academy, returned to his work with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found his purpose. He was no longer haunted by the dead, he was inspired by them. And in that inspiration, their sacrifice found its truest meaning.